benda lang. Kaya kiyo ni. Uy, ga.
Why don't you tell me what you want?
And when you told him to give him, you
The
again.
fuck?
Torture, brutality, pain, the gruesome reality for child predators who are caught under the law and imprisoned. Nothing is as terrifying as the prisons reserved for these cruel offenders. They suffer a gruesome fate, far more demeaning than you can ever imagine. Beyond the steel bars and walls, a different kind of justice takes place. In these prisons, survival is not guaranteed, and every moment feels like a step closer to a brutal end. These are the most feared prisons for child predators. ADX Florence, Colorado, USA. America's ultimate cell of misery, a living hell for the most notorious criminals alive. Known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies, this place is more than just a prison. It's a tomb designed to bury the world's most dangerous minds. Here, 23 hours of every day are spent in suffocating solitude, where prisoners rot in soundproof cells, cut off from almost all human contact. The unrelenting isolation crushes their minds, driving them to the brink of madness. The roster of demons trapped here reads like a nightmare. El Chapo, Richard Reed, the Boston Marathon bomber Dzhokhar Tsarnaev. Men so vicious, so twisted, that no other prison could hold them. By July 2024, 335 of these monsters remain locked away. Not mere criminals, but mass murderers, terrorists, and masterminds of chaos too dangerous to breathe outside these walls. As for their punishment, nearly endless solitary confinement in coffin-like cells measuring just 7 by 12 feet. Advocates scream in horror at this practice, but the system grinds on, indifferent to the shattered minds it produces. Even the privilege of stepping outside means being chained up like animals, caged in concrete pits as if they were rabid beasts. Communication with the outside world is all but severed. 4 15-minute calls a month if they're lucky, and visits only for the chosen few. Critics rage over the psychological torture this place inflicts, calling it a disgrace, a crime against humanity masquerading as justice. But if you think ADX Florence is controversial, this next one will make even this living nightmare seem merciful. Gitarama Prison, a living nightmare, a hell on earth where humanity is stripped away, leaving only suffering and madness. It is known as the prison no one escapes from, and it's easy to see why. It's a place of raw horror, where survival comes at the cost of sanity, and respect is won through bloodshed. Chaos rules these walls as desperate men, serving life sentences or worse, lash out with nothing to lose. The air reeks of death, with the stench of rotting flesh hanging thick, a grotesque reminder of the horrors lurking within. Gitarama's reputation as one of the world's deadliest prisons is not an exaggeration. It is said that prisoners, driven to the brink of starvation, have eaten the corpses of their fellow inmates just to survive. Packed into this overcrowded pit of despair are Rwanda's most violent offenders, rapists, murderers, child predators, and even thieves. But what troubles the most is the fear that some of the doomed souls inside might be innocent, wrongfully condemned to endure this savage torment. Built in 1960 to house British workers, this place was never meant to be a prison. But now, nearly 8,000 men are crammed into a space meant for just 400. During the Rwandan genocide in the mid-90s, Gitarama became a death trap, holding as many as 50,000 people in unimaginable conditions. In 1995 alone, over 1,000 men perished inside these walls, their bodies lost in the sea of filth. There is no sewage system here. Inmates wade through waist-deep human waste, swarming with mosquitoes that feed on their decaying flesh. And the guards? They do nothing, their indifference allowing criminal gangs to roam freely, preying on the weak and defenseless. While this might look like the worst prison so far, it is nothing compared to this next one. Guldani Prison, Georgia. One of the most dangerous prisons in Europe, where cruelty is not the exception, but the rule. Stories of institutionalized torture can be heard through its walls. Horrors inflicted not by rogue inmates, but by the very guards and officials sworn to uphold the law. A 2016 report by Georgia's parliament revealed the chilling truth. From 2004 to 2012, prisoners were brutalized in ways that defy belief. Heads smashed with gun butts, bones shattered beneath boots, and confessions ripped from drugged and broken men. The most terrifying part? High-ranking officials not only knew but ordered these tortures, using them as tools of political terror, creating a society gripped by fear. A lawsuit dragged even more horrors into the light. Inmates were forced into a world of silence, banned from speaking, stripped of their humanity. They couldn't even lie down during the day, only allowed to sit on their beds, as if resting was a crime. And the torment didn't stop at physical abuse. The prison staff choked off their access to the prison shop, cutting them off from even the most basic necessities. But the most soul-crushing cruelty? The systematic denial of family visits. They were severed from their loved ones, isolated in the dark with no hope of connection. However, things can't get worse compared to this next prison. Diyarbakir Prison, Turkey, a hellhole known for its horrifying conditions and systematic abuse of humanity. This prison has a dark reputation, infamous for human rights violations that makes the blood run cold. With its dark history rooted in political detainment, Diyarbakir has become a breeding ground for torture, cramming inmates into overcrowded cells like cattle and denying them even the most basic medical care. Inside, political prisoners suffer brutal treatment simply for holding their beliefs, fostering an atmosphere thick with fear and hostility. The complete absence of oversight turns this place into a lawless dungeon, solidifying Diyarbakir's status as one of the most notorious prisons on the planet and raising terrifying questions about the very nature of the Turkish penal system. During the early 1980s, Diyarbakir prison was synonymous with systematic torture. Here, prisoners endured unimaginable horrors, sleep deprivation that drove them to madness, savage beatings, the crackling agony of electrocution, and sexual assaults that stripped them of their humanity. They were forced to live in squalor, their bodies mutilated with the gruesome removal of fingernails, toenails, and even teeth. While official records claim 34 inmates died between 1980 and 1984 due to relentless torture and protests, the real death toll is shrouded in mystery. Hundreds emerged with bodies scarred and souls shattered, nearly every political prisoner carrying the heavy weight of psychological trauma. But you are just getting started if you think this is the worst prison yet. Black Dolphin Prison, Russia. In one of the most feared prisons on Earth, the Black Dolphin Prison is a place of torment buried deep in a remote, desolate corner of the country. Here, the most dangerous and twisted criminals, child predators, serial killers, terrorists, are locked away, their existence erased from the outside world. Inside these walls, prisoners face a reality beyond horror. Extreme isolation is their only companion, as they are completely cut off from each other and any trace of the world they once knew. The relentless regime forces them into backbreaking labor under the cold, unblinking gaze of guards who show no mercy. Every move, every breath is controlled, and defiance is crushed with violence and psychological terror. The stories that leak out of Black Dolphin are scary tales of brutality, abuse, and mental torture that turn men into hollow shells. The prison's ruthless environment has made it infamous across the globe, a place where suffering is the only constant. From the depths of Russia's oldest prison to the frozen wastelands of Siberia, where temperatures drop to 50 below, Black Dolphin is the ultimate punishment. Here, human rights are a joke, non-existent, swallowed whole by the darkness that looms in every corner. Prisoners are left to rot in isolation, with barely any contact with the outside world and nothing resembling recreation. And the worst part? What truly happens behind Black Dolphin's iron gates remains a closely guarded secret. Its true horrors concealed from all but those unfortunate enough to live it. But as terrifying as this place may seem, it's only a glimpse of the type of horror that exists in the next prison. Rikers Island, New York, USA. A ticking time bomb of death and despair. A place where survival is a gamble, even after inmates are granted compassionate release. Since 2016, it has earned its name as one of the deadliest jail systems in the city. When 14 local lawmakers dared to step inside this fortress of misery, what they found left them speechless. They saw inmates on the edge of suicide, shower stalls turned into cages, floors smeared with feces and urine, and dead cockroaches scattered around rotting food. They described the scene as nothing less than a humanitarian catastrophe, a living nightmare. Rikers holds around 6,000 inmates, most of whom haven't even been convicted yet, many locked up for nonviolent offenses or battling severe mental illness. This isn't just a jail, it's New York City's primary holding ground, guarded by thousands of correction officers who oversee the madness. A 2018 Bureau of Justice Statistics report revealed a terrifying reality. 1,020 deaths in U.S. jails that year, averaging 154 deaths per 100,000 inmates. The horror starts fast. Half of jail suicides happen within the first 9 days of incarceration, while other deaths follow soon after, typically within 17 days. But as grim and horrifying as Rikers may be, what comes next will make it seem like a mere prelude to true terror. San Quentin State Prison, California, USA. This prison is so bad it is the largest death row facility in the state. It is the state's oldest prison, but what truly defines it is the sheer brutality of its past and the suffocating security measures that tighten like a noose around anyone who dares enter. With multiple layers of security checks, a number of surveillance cameras, and guard towers that look like predators, it stands as a monument to control and punishment. This prison has housed some of history's most infamous monsters. Among them was Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker who spread terror across Southern California in the 1980s, and Sirhan, the man who gunned down Senator Robert F. Kennedy in cold blood in 1968. San Quentin's security is nothing short of terrifying. Guard towers rise like executioners over the prison, while advanced CCTV systems, motion sensors, and electronic monitoring ensure every move is watched, every breath counted. Phone calls are monitored, and no shadow escapes the prison's gaze. But what truly sets San Quentin apart is the death chamber. However, the terror in this prison is a far cry compared to this next one. Louisiana State Penitentiary, Angola, USA. A monstrous remnant of America's darkest past. Once a sprawling plantation built on the backs of enslaved people, the Louisiana State Penitentiary is now the largest maximum security prison in the nation, caging over 6,000 men in conditions that echo the brutal legacy of slavery. 74% of the prisoners are black, trapped in a system that still feels like a twisted extension of the horrors that came before. Inmate-on-inmate violence is rampant, sexual assaults lurk in the shadows, and guards, underpaid and indifferent, often respond with cruelty, backed by the brutal force of security dogs. The prison's so-called healthcare is a death sentence in itself, with countless men succumbing to preventable illnesses due to sheer neglect. Angola's brutal reputation has sparked outrage, igniting legal battles against the prison's inhumane treatment. In an act of desperation and defiance, a group of prisoners has filed a class-action lawsuit, revealing the horrifying truth. They are forced to toil in Angola's fields under the scorching sun, temperatures soaring over 100 degrees for little to no pay. It's a scene ripped straight from the prison's grim past. Men, mostly black, hoeing, weeding, and picking crops on the very land that once enslaved their ancestors, all under the cold gaze of armed guards. Angola's blood-stained history doesn't end there. Its violent legacy includes the infamous electric chair, Gruesome Gertie, where countless men met a gruesome end before it was replaced by lethal injection. The Louisiana State Penitentiary is a place where history's darkest chapters refuse to die, where men are condemned not only by their crimes, but by a system built to break them. However, the same can be said about this next prison, Pelican Bay State Prison, California, USA. Known as the most notorious maximum security prison in the United States, it is a place for the most notorious criminals. Behind its fortified walls, over 1,800 inmates are trapped, with 60% classified as the most dangerous, Level 4 criminals. Of these, 290 souls languish in the dreaded Security Housing Unit, SHU, condemned to the torment of solitary confinement. Pelican Bay's history is soaked in blood and controversy. In its early days, guards ran the place like a twisted coliseum, forcing prisoners into savage gladiator fights, while brutal physical abuse reigned unchecked. It took public outrage and legal action, most famously the 1995 Madrid versus Gomez case, to expose the horrors within and demand change. Even then, reforms were only half-hearted, and the shadow of violence never truly lifted. For years, Pelican Bay became a battleground for protests. Inmates starved themselves in hunger strikes, their only weapon against the torture of prolonged isolation. The pressure finally cracked the system in 2015 when California was forced to end its barbaric practice of indefinite solitary confinement. But even with those changes, the prison's reputation remains terrifying, a place where reforms are whispers drowned out by the screams of the damned. But you wouldn't believe me if I told you there is a prison far worse than this. Attica Correctional Facility, New York, USA. 50 years ago, a maximum security prison in upstate New York was called out for being notorious due to its brutal conditions for prisoners. Inmates received only one roll of toilet paper each month. Requesting more could lead to violent repercussions. As tensions reached a boiling point, over 1,000 furious prisoners erupted into a full-scale rebellion, taking 39 guards hostage and seizing control of the prison in a terrifying wave of chaos. For years leading up to the 1971 Attica riot, the conditions inside were nothing short of a living nightmare. The prison was packed beyond its limits, with inmates forced into overcrowded, filthy cells. Medical care was virtually non-existent, and the air reeked of racial hatred as guards routinely abused and humiliated prisoners. This was a powder keg waiting to explode, and when it did, the fallout was devastating. For 5 hellish days, more than 1,200 inmates took control of the massive New York prison, igniting a firestorm of national media attention. What they revealed was a prison system steeped in horror, where human lives were crushed under the weight of neglect and brutality. When the dust finally settled, at least 43 people lay dead, a massacre that would scar American history forever. The bloody rebellion would trigger public outrage, state investigations, and even street protests, as the full extent of the horror became impossible to ignore. The terror of Attica left such a deep wound that pieces of its dark legacy are now preserved in museums. Meanwhile, the next prison is nothing to write home about. HMP Belmarsh, London, UK. Notorious for extreme violence with reports of jihad networking leading to brutal incidents involving boiling water, this prison is known for innovating makeshift knives crafted from tins and gang-related beatings. As a Category A prison, Belmarsh houses the most dangerous and violent criminals in the UK, including terrorists, drug dealers, and sex offenders. Among its infamous inmates are David Carrick, a rapist and former Metropolitan officer, armed robber Charles Bronson, Soham murderer Ian Huntley, and extremist preacher Abu Hamza. Located beside the River Thames in southeast London, Belmarsh has earned the reputation of Britain's toughest prison, reflecting the serious threats posed by those within its walls. Over the years, a catalog of attacks has unfolded, with nearly 300 violent incidents reported in the last year alone. In this year's records, 282 assaults were documented, with 14 categorized as gang-related, including one conflict involving 7 inmates. Historically, Belmarsh has served as a destination for high-risk terrorists, earning the moniker Britain's Guantanamo Bay. Within its high-security unit, which functions as a prison within a prison, 3 convicted terrorists, including Hashem Abedi, sentenced to life for the Manchester Arena bombing, were found guilty of a vicious attack on a prison officer who feared for his life during the assault. There are serious concerns that extremists in this unit are networking, exchanging ideas, and engaging in what has been termed jihad banter. But if you think this is inhumane, wait until you hear about this next prison. Folsom State Prison, California, USA. Infamous for the brutal nightmare that unfolds behind its walls, this penitentiary is one of the most renowned hellholes ever. While the world may recognize its name, it's the horrifying reality inside that truly defines it. Escape attempts at Folsom have been countless, pushing guards to use terrifyingly harsh measures to maintain control. Excessive force isn't just a threat, it's a reality. Guards crack down hard, but even their brutality can't contain the chaos brewing inside. Overcrowding is rampant, with bodies packed into cells that were never meant to hold so many, turning Folsom into a pressure cooker of violence. Within these walls, hope is suffocated. Work and education programs are scarce, leaving the inmates to their own devices. Gangs run rampant, drug activity festers in the shadows, and assaults are a daily horror show. One cell block is so overcrowded it earned the dark title of the most packed in the entire country. Recently, all hell broke loose when 200 inmates erupted into a riot, forcing guards to fight their way in to restore control. When the blood cleared, 7 inmates were rushed to the hospital, battered and broken, leaving Folsom's dark legacy more terrifying than ever. But that's not as wild as this next prison. Wabash Valley Correctional Facility, Indiana, USA. From federal prisons to state correctional hellholes, Indiana harbors some of the most dangerous criminals in America, housed under brutal conditions few can imagine. One such facility stands out, a federal prison where death row inmates sit alongside violent offenders and child predators convicted of the darkest, most chilling federal crimes. This fortress of despair is locked down with extreme security measures, including areas for lower-risk inmates, but its reputation is carved into the cold steel of its death row. This is where the ultimate sentence is carried out, turning it into a place of final terror, where lives are brutally ended and hope is extinguished. The conditions inside are monstrous, so harsh and damaging that no human should be forced to endure them. Hundreds of inmates rot in prolonged isolation, left to suffer under unbearable, unjust circumstances that break both body and spirit. The horror deepens for those with mental illness, who are trapped in these dark corners of Indiana's prison system. These facilities are a nightmare for anyone, but for the mentally ill, it's a living hell. Across the U.S., an increasing number of mentally ill individuals are being thrown into prisons woefully unprepared to care for them, turning their lives into a relentless routine of suffering. While this prison is sickening, it would be a free world when compared to this next prison. USP Leavenworth, Kansas, USA, a place where the horrors of confinement take on a life of their own. Once the largest maximum security fortress in the country, it may have been downgraded to medium security in 2005, but the terror inside its walls remains unrelenting. Designed with the cold precision of the Auburn system, the prison's massive rectangular structure houses countless souls in darkness. Over the years, as the population increased, new factory buildings and cells were added, turning it into a factory of punishment. Leavenworth's history is drenched in violence and chaos. In one infamous event, 6 prisoners hijacked a locomotive to make their daring escape, while in 1931, 7 inmates, backed by ruthless gangsters, seized the warden himself in a brazen breakout attempt. Reports from prisoners and their families paint a picture of pure inhumanity. The prison has been on lockdown for weeks, leaving inmates trapped in even more extreme conditions. Officially, the facility is operating under modified operations. But what that really means is a deeper descent into the nightmare of Leavenworth. With over 1,800 prisoners, including some who haven't even been convicted yet, the prison's dark legacy of suffering stretches far beyond its past. Executions were carried out here, including the hanging of infamous serial killer Karl Panzram in 1930, and a chilling double execution in 1938. But this is only the beginning. Leavenworth is just one of many prisons where brutality remains unchecked. And if you think it can't get any more dangerous, then wait until you hear about this next one. Mendoza Prison, Argentina. Plagued by serious overcrowding, inadequate healthcare, and massive violence, the facility has struggled to maintain even the most basic standards. Overpopulation has pushed living conditions to the brink, severely affecting both the physical and mental health of inmates. Lack of resources and minimal rehabilitation efforts have only increased its troubling reputation. The crisis at Mendoza Prison reveals deeper systemic failures in Argentina's penal system, highlighting the urgent need for reforms to reduce overcrowding, improve infrastructure, and address the well-being of the incarcerated. Speaking of hellholes, nothing comes close to this next prison, Marion Penitentiary, Illinois, USA. Earning its name as the new Alcatraz, the House of Pain, and the end of the line, the federal penitentiary at Marion remains one of the toughest prisons in the federal system. Marion is the only facility among the 45 federal institutions with a Level 6 security classification. This means it receives the most unmanageable inmates in the entire federal system. Most prisoners here, serving an average sentence of 40.5 years, are confined to their cells for 22.5 hours each day under constant lockdown. The prison is fortified with 8 guard towers and surrounded by double chain-link fences, topped and layered with razor wire. However, their prisoners experience extreme suffering inside the 4 walls of the prison. But then, there is still another prison that is extremely cruel to child predators.
Not far from the Mexico border lies a high-security prison that holds some of the most dangerous people in the country.
USP Tucson, Arizona, USA. In the middle of the Arizona desert, the state's only high-security federal prison are filled with male inmates deemed too dangerous for lower-security facilities. Nearby, a minimum security camp for men stands in stark contrast to the prison's imposing structure. Behind its iron gates, the prison features both single and shared cells, surrounded by heavily guarded perimeters. Here, every movement is closely watched, with a higher staff presence than most federal prisons, ensuring tight control over the lives within. As part of the Sex Offender Management Program, USP Tucson houses a larger population of inmates convicted of sex crimes. This allows staff to maintain close supervision, creating a controlled environment that also provides a degree of protection for these individuals within the prison system. And even though this prison has always been too rigid to its prisoners, the next one will blow your mind. HMP Wakefield, West Yorkshire, UK. Known as Monster Mansion and the Warehouse of the Worst, this prison is the final stop for some of Britain's most infamous criminals. Inside its fortified walls are men whose names are written in the darkest chapters of British crime. Violent offenders whose acts have shocked the nation. From the outside, Wakefield may appear like any other prison, with its towering walls and layers of security. But beyond those barriers, it houses Category A inmates, rapists, child offenders, terrorists, and serial killers, men deemed too dangerous for lesser facilities. As one of the UK's highest security prisons, Wakefield holds a unique position in the British penal system. The majority of its inmates are convicted of the most heinous sexual offenses, making it a place where danger and control exist in a constant, uneasy balance. But it's far safer than this next prison. USP Terre Haute, Indiana, USA. A place like this is created when the society chooses to isolate the most nefarious criminals ever. Here, some of the country's most dangerous men are caged, and violence can be found in every corner. Inside, brutality is the norm, and blood spills regularly. This high-security prison has earned its dark reputation through a series of horrifying assaults that have shocked the nation. One inmate launched a savage attack on a fellow prisoner, while others bled out in local hospitals after vicious stabbings from their peers or brutal gunfire from the very guards meant to keep order. In one bone-chilling incident, a single inmate, filled with rage, stabbed 4 guards during a routine contraband search, showing just how deadly every moment in this hellish prison can be. The terror doesn't end with the prisoners. Corruption runs deep here. Some guards are not just negligent, they are part of the problem, indifferent to the chaos, and even feeding into it. In Terre Haute, the lines between protector and predator blur, leaving those inside to fend for their lives against threats from every side. And if you think that is bad, then what about this next prison? Alcatraz, California, USA. Once a notorious maximum security federal penitentiary, this prison has housed some of the most dangerous criminals in U.S. history. Now a historical landmark, The Rock stands as a reminder of a time when it was designed to confine men too dangerous for other prisons. Within its cold walls, discipline and control became a battleground, as escape attempts and infamous inmates gave Alcatraz a dark reputation. Alcatraz was conceived as a different kind of prison, built on silence and isolation. Inmates could only speak during meals or recreation, and for those held in the dreaded D block, solitary confinement was the norm. While food, clothing, shelter, and medical care were guaranteed, any other privilege, like family visits or access to the prison library, had to be earned through good behavior. The first 137 prisoners arrived in shackles, most of them convicted murderers or bank robbers. As they stepped onto the island, weighed down by heavy handcuffs, they began their long sentences in a place designed to strip away not just freedom, but hope. Years later, until its closure, 36 men dared to defy the odds in 14 separate escape attempts. Nearly all were captured or met their end in the icy waters surrounding the island. The fate of these men, however, remains a mystery till this day. So what do you think about these prisons?